So good morning, everybody. I would like to welcome you on behalf of Advance to our keynote presentation of this program by Lynn Conway. But before she speaks, I wanted to give you a little bit of a sense of where the idea for this program came from. And it really was Linda Katehi's brainchild, and unfortunately, she can't be here with us today, and we certainly all hope she's listening and she's on the mend. But I had a conversation with a group of graduate students at a conference, and when they found out I was a fan of the Marvel movies, they asked me the question. And the question is the question that's circulating on social media, though I'd never heard it before, which is, if you could choose a superpower, what superpower would you choose? Flight or invisibility? And my reaction was, that's a choice? It seems like an odd choice, because as a woman and a woman in STEM, I'm no stranger to invisibility. And it's more like a super handicap, than a superpower. So I shared some of my experiences with imposed invisibility, but was shocked at the depth and level of the experiences that the students started sharing, which were, many of them, far worse than anything that I'd experienced. So I came back and said, Linda, we have a problem, because this is a strong discouragement to participation in science when we think we're a meritocracy and we think that, self-promotion is what everybody does and excels at. You can't do that if there's this willful invisibility imposed upon you. So Linda immediately said, Lynn has to come. Lynn has to help us launch a program and talk about these issues, because she has such a great depth of perspective on them. And so Lynn is a faculty member in computer sciences and electrical engineering. And she has won numerous medals and honors for her work. Her early work laid the foundation for the current modern chip industry. So she's highly accomplished as a scientist. But what drew me to her is her personal motto, which is, if you want to change the future, start living as if you are already there. And I think that is profoundly wise. And so without further, I will turn it over to Lynn. I am so excited that she's here and can address some of these issues with us. Lynn.
Thank you, Linda. It's a real pleasure to be here with you today. And think of this as I'm going to share experiences I've had and some thoughts I have about those experiences and things I've learned. But I think they're representative of experiences many people have had. And so there's a lot of open questions as to how do these things happen? And we'll perhaps get into that in a question and answer later. But it's really great to be here. And I believe that Linda is watching on streaming, so I want to say hi to Linda. And hope you're there, and I'm hoping I get a chance to see you tomorrow. So, what is the story we're going to talk about here today and focus in on? Well, back in 2015, Megan Smith raised some really profound questions about women's contributions in science and engineering and math, and their stories being erased. And so what we're going to do today, we're going to examine a case study of such an eraser. And we're going to think about a conjecture I have about possibly how it happened. But the conjecture is kind of counterintuitive. So just a quick overview. We're going to go through many decades of history here, quickly, one after the other. First, we're going to do a little bit of visualization of past erasures of women's contributions. Then I want to go back to 2013, and I want to reflect on an event that I witnessed. And it was really an important point in my life. And this reflection will help kind of tell you a little bit more about me and about kind of how I feel about all this. Then we're going to spend most of our time on this story. We're going to look at the events that happen. We're going to look at people's reactions to those events, and then my investigation into what happened. And then at the end, do some detective work and come up with this idea in some Q&A. So let's just go back and look about the history of women's treatment in STEM. And let me see. Oh boy, this is not letting me play the video. Nope. We did a dry run with this, but I do not see how to play this video. This is pretty important. Yeah, if I had my computer, I'd use the... Oh, there it is. There we go. Can you hear it? Hold it. I have a fix. Play it.
Up till the 80s, computer science was sort of 30 to 40% women, and we've just tanked. You know, we talked about Steve Jobs. There's these incredible photographs from the launch of the Macintosh in the 80s. And there's the Rolling Stone pictures that were published. And so the historic record shows this group actually of 10 people in a pyramid, actually 11, 7 men and 4 women. And every photograph you see with the Mac team, Joanna Hoffman, who was the product manager, a great teammate of Steve Jobs, Susan Carey did all the graphics and user interface, artist side. None of them made it into the Jobs movie in the Mac scene. They're not even cast, and every man in the photographs is in the movie with a speaking role. And so it's debilitating to our young women to have their history or almost erased or uncalled.
Okay,
and
other
it's
than
strange.
the blanket discrimination,
Yeah.
how does that happen? I mean, what's the interest of somebody not recognizing the contribution of women? How do they benefit from that?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't see any real benefit of it.
Of course they're not. So
Yeah.
why do they do it?
I don't know, but it's something we need to get over. You know, Katherine Johnson, African-American woman who calculated the trajectories for Alan Shepard, John Glenn, who wouldn't fly without Katherine checking the math, and the Apollo mission. You know, there's no African-American woman technical person in the Apollo movies that I ever saw as a kid. You know, we got to get these in there because if you know your past, as we're discussing, your future is different.
So the message here is there were 4 women on the Macintosh team. There you see the pyramid of the original design team. Not a single one in this movie that came out about the events. And here you have the problem. Debilitating for young women to have their history almost erased. And of course, there's Katherine Johnson's story. I think many of you are familiar with this. The cool thing here is her story did come out, and here she is at age 98. And she lived long enough to see her story told. So maybe if I live long enough, I'm 81 now, and I'm going to make 100 for sure. That's my attitude. And so who knows, maybe it'll happen. Also, did you notice a little Me Too moment that snuck in? Remember that interview with Megan Smith was before Charlie Rose crashed and burned, okay? So you see, there's always more going on than you realized at the time. Who would have thought, right? I thought it was a great interview, and who knows? All right. But this effect has been well documented, and especially in Margaret Rossiter's Women Scientists in America, this amazing series that's just huge, and it goes way, way back and comes forward. I highly recommend this to people who want to see some of the more detailed investigations that have been made. And she coined the term Matilda effect for this repression and denial of women's contributions, often attributed to male colleagues. And it was similar to, and kind of in response to, Robert Burton's term, the Matthew effect, of how eminent scientists often get credit for lesser-known researchers. For example, the prize will usually be offered to the most senior researcher in a project, even if the grad student did all the work. We're all familiar with this process in our research universities, where very prominent, well-known laboratory leaders actually will tell you that one of the benefits and perks of their position is they get to take credit for all their grad students' work. Believe me, that's actually a very known thing. And it's what a grad student has to do in order to hopefully become a famous lab leader, you see? So there's a kind of perpetuating system there. But now to go back and reframe my story a little bit. Back in 2013, I had a wonderful experience going to the White House LGBT Pride Month celebration. And what I'm going to do is just read you some words that kind of help set the stage for what follows. And just listen as I read these words. On a sultry June afternoon, my husband and I walked towards the White House. I reflected back on my gender transition in 1968. Shunned as a social outcast, I'd lost family, friends, and all social support. Fired by IBM, I'd lost a promising research career. In many cities, I could have been arrested or, worse yet, institutionalized. Evading those fates, I completed my transition, took on a secret new identity, and started all over again as a contract programmer. Any outing, and I'd become unemployable. So, you see, what happened was fear channeled me into stealth mode. And for over 30 years after that, I covered my past, living as if I was a spy in my own country. But now it was June 13, 2013. My husband Charlie and I were joining many other advocates as the president's at the president's White House reception for LGBT Pride Month. The air was really full of joy. As we awaited the president, I reflected further. See, by then I'd been out for 15 years, or so I thought. I'd been out on the internet to reveal my past to colleagues, out as a trans advocate, and an activist against psychiatry's pathologization of gender variance. When I was hidden in the back rooms of the Xerox Palo Alto Research Center decades before, launching innovations as the hidden hand behind the VLSI microelectronics revolution, I didn't mind being invisible in my field back then, where no one had a clue what I was doing. See, I was thrilled to even have a job. So let me tell you how I felt back then. But out has many shades of gray. And even in recent years, I kept on shyly holding back, covering in the darker shadows. And although times had changed, I'd clung to old habits. Down through the decades, no one could explain how this revolution had happened. Results were taken for granted. But you see, I'd gained vital knowledge about generating paradigm shifts such as the VLSI revolution, but I feared my personal history would loom large in folks' minds and obscure any attempted explanation. Who would believe me if I started talking about it? So it wasn't until 2012 that I got up the nerve to publish a memoir to begin revealing how it had happened. And as the president entered the room, I glanced around, in fact, took a couple of photos, and took in the joyful vibes. As he began to speak, I grasped how far we'd come. Times had more than changed. A fresh wind was sweeping through our society. Favorable winds in those years. They kind of shifted a little bit recently, but that's another story. But this was especially amongst the younger generations. And then I thought of the millions of other LGBT people out there, and I tried to envision their lifelong struggles against ostracism, their losses of families and employment, their oppression by having to cover, while not being known for who they were, what they'd done, who they'd loved, and who loved them. So really in a flash, I saw the vastness of the suffering, and then it hit me. You see, we've come so far so fast that many, many, many others could now begin uncovering too. See, come out of that past, come out of the habit of covering, and just live fully into the future. So, 2013. Now we're going to study an example of an erasure. And we're going to go back to the future several times as we go through these things. I'm going to do it fairly quickly. At Xerox Palo Alto Research Center, the modern network personal computing paradigm was created by the Park researchers on site, and they used it as they were evolving and creating it. One way of thinking about it, it was a time when new image and word processing tools could create and share digital document files that you see on the bitmap displays of PCs and laptops to this day. And you could share them electronically, but importantly, you could laser print them on paper media. And you could the results could be embedded either in electronic documents or in an office and other documents like magazines, books, etc. You could yourself publish things yourself rather than an industry doing it. What we're going to follow here is the covert birth of modern VLSI chip design paradigm, where chip designers used new design methods and tools to create and share chip design layout files, which after all are just artwork files, and then send them to foundries where they could be lithographically printed on silicon wafers. Then those disassembled and the resulting chips embedded in all kinds of stuff. Okay? So this is a separate thing that was going on, but as we'll see, people didn't realize that was what was going on. And there's a picture of a wafer, a chip, and a package chip from 1979, the flashpoint when this all really took off, and I'll come to that. The stage had been set by the emergence of integrated circuit technology, where modest number of transistors, here's some pictures of early chips from the 60s, could be lithographically printed on little chips of silicon to create circuitry. And you'll see it's really free artwork, and actually it was prepared as artwork. You know, the designs that you worked out, and somebody would cut those into mask patterns that would be used to make the masks that would then be used to print the chips. Rapid advances in the technologies of the lithography enable printing of ever finer features. And there was a real watershed cross in 1971, important year, when Intel introduced the first single-chip microprocessor. And here's a little picture of it. 2,300 transistors. And if you look closely, if you were to magnify it, again, it was just artwork. These designs weren't digitized. They were, circuit designs were done given architectural block diagrams, and then those were carved out of the material used to do photolithography, and masks were made from that. So this is really a lot of handwork, if you will. Now, Gordon Moore at Intel observed the number of transistors, reliably printed on chips was doubling every 2 years. And there's a little starting graph down there on the log scale. And a faculty member at Caltech named Carver Mead named this Moore's Law. He was a consultant at Intel, and looking back, that was a pretty clever career move. You know, no one quite saw where this was all going, but he named it after the right guy. One of his students showed there were no physical limits to densities up to several million transistors per centimeter squared. So right when I was at Park, it turned out that looking ahead, we could envision that by 1990, down up in the upper right corner, an entire supercomputer of that day could be printed on a single chip. Okay. Now, actually, that came to pass, but that's another story. But this was quite a motivating insight, to say the least. And it triggered a clever research between where I was at Xerox PARC and Caltech. My laboratory manager, Bert Sutherland, tapped me to lead a team there, and Mead and some of his students joined the team at Caltech, where Bert's brother, Ivan Sutherland, was chair of computer science. And we're going to launch an exploration to figure out how to do this. Now, at PARC, the stage was further set. As I mentioned, the tremendous public thing that was emerging there was this modern personal computing. The Alto, if you take a look at that, bitmap display, quite a piece of iron, but still very much like a modern PC. Original sketch of the Ethernet, so that you can network the computers together. Laser printers, also innovated at PARC, on the network, so you could design things, you could pull together a bunch of things and print them in as a document, maybe with multiple authors on the laser printer. All that was happening quickly. At the same time, at DoD, the early ARPANET It was just beginning. And by the time our work started, the ARPANET had leapfrogged from where it was there, and guess what was also on the ARPANET, in addition to Stanford and Berkeley and so forth, and Caltech? Park. We were on the ARPANET. So, this was amazing. Right at that time, I got an idea, and it involves some statistics and mathematics and this, that, and the other thing, but it was the conception of a set of chip layout design rules that were encoded as dimensionless inequality equations, not rules of what you had to do, but rules of what you could not go beyond, but you could do anything else outside of that, larger than that. And I won't go into details, but here they are. And what these did was they enabled the digital chip designs to be digitally encoded, scaled and reused as more laws advanced. Now, these were just rectilinear. And you think, well, why would we do that? People would complain, my goodness, look at all the complex contours we could put in these things we can scrunch down. Why on earth would you want things to be rectilinear? Well, you know, any computer science will tell you a little bit about complexity theory and about scanning and trying to basically build files that hold image data. And these kind of rules enabled designs that were almost as compressed as any other method, but that were computationally vastly easier, more efficient to manipulate, to search for design violations, et cetera, et cetera. But there's something more here. At the outer level of this was a meta-architectural technosocial innovation. And here's what it is. As Moore's law scales down, and ever faster transistors can be printed on individual chips. By the way, when you scale the transistor down linearly, not only does it get, you can print it more densely, but its speed scale, its time constant to cross the little gate inside scales down too. So they get smaller, but they also get faster, which is hugely important. But here's the process. Here you're in step one. Okay, we're going to start right now. We're going to use our current design tools, running on our current computers, to design the chipsets for more powerful computers, namely for the computers that we're going to have 2 years from now, let's say. So the chips that are going to be in them are going to be available in maybe 18 months, 19, 20 months, okay? And then we're going to print the more powerful chipsets using the next denser fabrication process, which is coming online soon because we're using computers from the past, you see? And then some of, not a lot, but some of the chips that come out of this wave of chips being printed, we're going to use to update our current computers to make them more powerful. And then you just repeat. It's cyclic. It just runs every 2 years. And that's Moore's law. It's a technosocial process. Sociologists take heart. That plays a big role here, as does network-based diffusion analysis and all that kind of complex system stuff. So this is a technosocial innovation. It's not just technical, you see? It spawns tribes, clans that are interacting with each other, that are nested, as we'll see. So if ever more engineers and design tool builders did that on an expanding number of increasingly powerful computers, the iterating technosocial expansion process could exploratorily and innovatively generate ever more powerful digital systems. If, there's a big if ever more engineers, where are the engineers going to come from? That's a good question. It's like, okay, how are they going to learn how to do this? You see, there's this gold rush you can imagine being launched. You see the point out there in 1990, you could put a supercomputer on a chip. That's what the Pentium became, by the way, around that time. And how would you get there? It's going to take a lot of people participating in growing this out. So what I did was I began documenting the methods in, guess what? An evolving computer-edited laser-printed textbook used by a handful of people. So some pictures. So we're using Park's Alta computers not just to mechanize via tools the evolution of the chip designs, but to help mechanize the evolution of the design knowledge, too. And that's what became this book that became somewhat notorious in the field, the book by Carver Mead called Introduction to VLSI Systems. Now, there's Mead and Conway there, but we'll come to that later. And in fact, people call this the book that changed everything. People who weren't aware of the rest of the story. You see? Okay. Now, what I also did was I introduced these new design methods in a special VLSI design course at MIT in 1978 using this laser printed textbook, which made copies for all the students. I was following a script that Charles Steinmetz used to propagate his revolutionary AC electricity methods at Union College back in 1912. One of the things I've always been interested in is people who've done really wild and crazy things. I've tried hard to figure out how they did it. One that really fascinated me was Steinmetz, and there's quite a story there. I won't go into it now, but I could envision a transition he had between the 1890s and the 1900s, where he had tried by giving papers at IEEE conferences and so forth to explain his methods. And, you know, people thought it was wonderful. He was becoming well known in the elite sort of industrial academic complex group of people at the time for that work, but it wasn't taking off. So what he did was he just simply wrote an incredibly concise, powerful book about what the methods were and how you use them, as though that was it. And he taught it to engineering students at Union College, and it's seeded and it's spread everywhere. And by the way, these people just immediately caught on to it, very straightforward. Mainly, you didn't need to use differential equations. You could do most of the AC electrical analysis with algebraic equations, and that spread it. And it was really Steinmetz that spread the AC revolution in terms of the knowledge that engineers had to work with it directly. So I ran this design course, and I kind of tried to do something like this. And the students learned how to do chip design in the first half of the course. So 8 weeks you learn how to be a chip designer. We're talking seniors, master's level students in EE and CS. And then these were fabricated out at HP right after the course. The design file is out there, and they did it. Here's students. Now, what was interesting is I want you to take a look at an example of one of the first projects someone ever did who's never designed a chip before. His name was Guy Steele, and his design is down in the lower left corner of that map, and you can see it over in the chip photo. That's a complete Lisp microprocessor. He's a student at MIT, a bright guy, but he never designed chips before. So how did he do that? I knew when these designs came out. There were some other really cool ones. There was a, where is it? Oh, I'm blocking on it right now. But another cool, Jim Cherry, up number 2, up in the upper right. A chip that would mirror and rotate image data. Pretty useful. This is back before Silicon Graphics, the Geometry Engine, all that. So there's something brewing here. Now, this course stunned folks across Silicon Valley because up to then the chip design process had been mysterious. Only a few computer engineers working for the chip manufacturers knew how the chips were being designed. See, they work for the printer. Imagine you're a writer, but you only get to see your stuff in print if you work for the printing plant. You see? Much less having a publishing industry, much less having any idea of being just a freelance writer and having access to toss stuff on the internet. You see? So the knowledge of how to architect these new kinds of digital machines relied on just a handful of engineers who accidentally found themselves in being the ones who produce the block diagrams that got passed on to the logic designers and circuit designers inside these burgeoning chip manufacturers. So, many other top research universities wanted to offer MIT-like courses. But how would they do it? So I'm thinking about this. I mean, I knew this was going on. I was getting some feedback. People want to do an MIT-type course. And I figured out how to do it. Why not rerun the MIT 78 course at a dozen research universities or so, and use my lecture notes from MIT to keep everything in sync? But then, okay, I could do that, but how would you print the chips? There'd be so many coming in from all different universities. Here's where I had the idea of an e-commerce system that enables student design files to be remotely submitted via the ARPANET to a server at PARC. The server would run software to pack these designs into multi-project chips, like composing the print files for magazine using remotely submitted articles. And then we'd print all those chips at HP Labs again. So the idea is you have all these different designs being done by students at different universities. They're not going to manufacture all those designs. What you want to do is you want to take those and have the masks for those be used to take just a few boatloads of wafers going through a regular processing line and pattern those. And you'd get enough individual chips out of that to, if a lot of the projects were put on small chips, you could break them apart and you could figure out how to get enough wafers to get enough chips to have every designer get half a dozen of their chips. So this was the idea. Now you have to realize there was no funding for this. This is just an idea. And I was at PARC, so you have to understand this is bootleg. And a lot of researchers know what bootleg means. You know, you're getting funding to do this, but you're really on the side of doing that. And so what I did was I took a chance and I announced to the other research universities that if they ran MIT-like courses that next fall in '79, we at PARC would gather up all their design files if they used our methods and had them all in our format and did it all digitally, and we would get those printed and sent back to all their students. Now I use the words, you know, you want to run an MIT course, we at PARC. There's got nothing to do with me. You see how this is starting to frame up? Like, did anybody really know who was doing this? No, see? So naturally, PARC had a great mistake at the time, and people took this enormously seriously. People were really interested in that MIT course, so let's do it. We'll start a course. And I was able to supply them with all the materials that an instructor would need to run such a course. They had my complete canned lecture notes, which I had canned because I was very shy. I wrote down every word and unfolded every equation and every diagram, so the entire thing could be taught by someone who had no idea what it even was. You see? And if they did it on the schedule and they did it right, it would all fit into this this sort of ecosystem of machinery that's starting to get developed to spin it up. So here's the ARPANET in 80. This is, you know, just a year beyond 1979. And if you look on there, you'll find PARC. And the major research universities were on there, and there were 12 of them in this first round that decided to run the course. And I've also, and by the way, these slides were all online. There's a lot of details with embedded links, so people can study them later. But on the right there, you'll see a sketch of the sequence of artifacts from code to packaged chip. You know, code that gets sent over the ARPANET, things get processed and printed and then diced up and packaged in chips. And on the far right is sort of the information flow between the different groups that was occurring at each of those junctures. So here's an important diagram. What MPC 79, which is what we call this thing, it was like a big internet happening, ARPANET happening. It was a large-scale demonstration and validation of the design methods, courses, tools, and infrastructure. So if you look on the right there, the fact that it went to production of actual chips, those chips that came back were giving feedback on, first of all, the production process. Did it work? We took files. Did they come out right? Yep. The design projects the students did. Yep, some of those design projects actually worked, and others they were able to figure out why they didn't. But then it also gave feedback to the design environments and the courses and the text and instructors materials and the design methodology. So what that is a nesting of abstract knowledge at each level that's being tested and evolved forward, with the resulting chips being the sort of final lab experiment that's feeding back to everything in the system. So it was a risky adventure, to put it mildly. If this thing hadn't worked, my name would have been what, you know? Never heard from again, okay? Like, who was it that launched this crazy thing, okay? And I want you to see something here also. It also triggered synchronized cyclic gain in an exponentiation of a VLSI designed technosocial ecosystem. You see, at each of these levels, there are different tribes of people who formed little cliques to do things at that level. You know, the EDA industry, various fabulous design shops, as they were called, where people knew how to design the chips, but they didn't have a fabrication facility, and so forth. And so what this is a pretty complex system. And I throw in the word synchronized to basically echo works like Strogatz on sync, Steve Strogatz at Cornell, and to the great Arthur Winfrey and his work on the geometry of biological time. And then the entangled artifacts is to echo the work of Ian Hodder, the great archaeologist, and his analyses of the site Ketelhoyuk in Turkey, and the complexities it reveals about the coevolution of people and their artifacts. All of which is grist for an engineer who wants to turn that around, and instead of studying it, do it. You see? So that's my tendency. It's like, well, how would you take these ideas and actually bring them into action? Because this is what's actually happening anyway. But here's the thing. By 1982 and 83, these courses were being offered at 113 universities all around the world. So let's visualize this. 76, how are you going to cope with VLSI complexity? 77, well, one thing is these scalable design rules, kind of this bridging of this digital divide. 78, starting to write this book, launching these design methods at MIT, and 79, launching MPC 79. And over the past 40 years, this stayed on track all the way, and now we've passed 1 billion transistors. So when you look at this, start thinking about the compounding of technosocial system interest, if you will, people and their artifacts spinning up. Okay. Now let's go back and follow the high-tech community's reaction to what I just described. 81, people sensed something had happened. So we get this award. This was actually a big deal back then. It was very respected. And a few awards came in. Fender Award in 84, Weatherall Medal in 85. We both got an NAE 84 and 89. But for 20 years after that, Mead received increasing major recognitions, and my role is erased. So here's some of the awards that Mead received. Won't go down through all of them, but there's some pretty big ones there. For example, the MIC Lemelson Award in 99, $500,000. Now, in 99, that was a lot of money. It's even a lot of money now. I sure wished I could have gotten some of that, even a third of it or a quarter. But anyway. Oh, and National Medal of Technology in 2002. See, that's a real biggie, turns out. In academia, that's like, ooh, you know. Getting an academy is one thing, but the National Medal of Technology. And the bottom one I'm going to mention it was kind of the final nail in the coffin, which hurt me greatly. But most of those awards were for innovations that were solely mine, turns out. And you can go back and read the awards, and we can point out, you know, the different things. Oh, okay. So by 2009, the erasure was complete. Here was the event. This is so amazing. This really got to me. They had a big event at the Computer History Museum where they inducted people into the Inventors Hall of Fame, and it was on the 50th birthday celebration of integrated circuitry. And guess who took center stage? Andy Grove, another Intel person, Gordon Moore, and Carver Mead. So there's Gordon Moore, Carver Mead, and there's Carver Mead. And let's see, if you look down at the fine print, it says, Carver Mead left will be honored for devising the so-called VLSI method for designing chips. You see, just like that. And there's the image, you know. This is the image of the heroic solo genius who creates everything. Now, what was interesting is I wasn't, not only was not invited, I didn't even know this thing was happening. So now, think about these pictures and flip back to the Macintosh story. See? So this is just an example. Just think about it as a story, and you can sort of see the parallels. They say, okay, so here's the story about my investigations into this and reporting on what happened. Now, this is still unfolding, but I uncovered a lot of stuff, and by 2012, I found the voice to write a memoir about the events that sort of unfolded the story as I did first. I just told what happened without getting any into, gee, why? I didn't mention erasure. There's none of that in there. But it just unfolded it so that the story was told. And that was the first time in decades. You'll see how long it took me to do that. Remember when I was talking about uncovering back at the president's LGBT reception? I had been so fearful of trying to say anything against what was happening. And by then I was pretty much almost in PTS, you know? Just like, this was not something that was easy to take. I'm not as cheerful and bouncy as I am now that I've kind of got under that. I sort of taken that dark cloud and I said, I don't like this, I'm going to put it somewhere else. Okay, I know where to put it. Over there. And you know who's under it now. Well, so here's one of the links to other parts of the investigation and the results of it. I won't go into details, but I was scurrying around doing a lot of stuff during these years to get a grip on this story. And there's actually evidence of paradigm shifting. Wow, got in the Hall of Fellows Computer History Museum, people in computer science know that's like a big deal, and collected honorary doctorates, and really got a wonderful reception and award from the Royal Society of Edinburgh and the James Clerk Maxwell Medal. That was actually in sort of the year of Maxwell that it happened, so there's a lot of celebrations of that then that I got to meet people, and so it was a wonderful event. Okay, so there's disappearance. Well, now, okay, but how did that happen? See? How did it happen? And here is this sort of weird twist I've kind of come upon that comes from readings and learnings in anthropology and sociology. So we observe the Matilda effect and Matthew effect happening here. Okay. I was a woman. Remember, transness had nothing to do with this. I was in stealth. Okay. So I experienced a woman arriving, not having worked, if you will, coming back into industry and working as a contract programmer in 1969. A lot of women were coming in back then. So I rode that wave. But at the same time, I ended up working under an already eminent Caltech full professor who was a personal consultant to Gordon Moore. And so these effects, you see, Wharton described it well. They are self-fulfilling prophecies. They're a false definition of the situation, evoking a new behavior which makes the original false conception come true. The specious validity of the self-fulfilling prophecy perpetuates a reign of error, for the prophet will cite the actual course of events as proof he was right from the beginning. The proof that people were right that Mead did this work, or so-and-so did this work, is, well, he got all these awards. You see the weird thing in there? The fact that all the awards were given, who are all these award committees? How did they figure this out? And so there's a deep question going on there about sort of the whole conception of celebrity versus action and innovation in the real world. Very interesting. But is that all that's happening? Or are there even deeper systemic forces at play? So here it is. Something far more subliminal and fundamental was happening at a social level. And the beauty of this is it involves no errors, no conspiracies, no repressions, and no bad guys. There's no impugning of motive. Now, of course, you could find evidence of motivation and action that was deliberate. But this does not require that at all. That's why it's a little hard to get your head around, but in fact, it potentially explains more because you do not have to attribute bad action to anybody. Almost all people are blind to innovations, especially ones made by others whom they do not expect to make innovations. See, for most people, others are almost all people, except a few they know that they think are very smart. So few people ever witness or visualize innovations, even ones made right in front of their eyes, even including some made by themselves. See, actually, if you walked in a room, somebody was right now innovating something, well, how would you know it's an innovation? First of all, if they were doing something that was different, you might look, geez, why are they doing that weird thing, whatever it is? But you wouldn't think it was something new necessarily. It's something that's out of the routine, out of the daily spiral. So why are they doing that? But then if you did do it, since an innovation, you would have no clue what it was unless they explained it to you or somebody else did. And so there's this thing about innovations, you don't notice them right when they're being made. They're sort of unnoticeable. They don't have a voice. You see the things, and the things don't appear to have a voice. Instead, when internally orienting towards novelties, let's call something a novelty, that people stumble upon, something that just gets their attention, like, what the heck is that? What most people do is they look for cues from other people as whether to accept or reject the novelty, or maybe even whether to notice it in the first place. No one else is noticing this thing. Someone who could have fallen down and they're dying, and people say, oh, geez, another homeless person. You see what I mean? People come up with explanations. So from this perspective, this Matthew effect and Matilda effect are derivatives of this kind of, both the Matthew effect and Matilda effect have the kind of tendency to impugn negative motives to someone else. It's deliberate. But this spreads it out. It isn't necessarily deliberate. Of course, there are many cases where, and in this case, there may have been here and there some deliberate activity. We do not need to conjecture that. So let's visualize in action. Here's really the key of it. See, most students at MIT thought they were learning how chips were designed in Silicon Valley. So the course was, in effect, a giant MIT hack. I'd gone to MIT. So hacks were a big thing. See, so the people did it without realizing they were learning radical new methods. The astonished reaction among Silicon Valley's cognoscenti led to intense interest in reverse engineering. How did MIT do this? So they immediately wanted to offer MIT VLSI courses. Now the next year, the chip designers that signed up for those courses, the students who did it and were going to get chip design, they took for granted this access to foundries. And they just used it. I mean, they're just a student taking a course, oh, Park's going to print these for these, okay? And no one realized that whole happening was an even larger paradigm-shifting hackathon, launching this modern microchip infrastructure for fabless design, silicon foundries with e-commerce connecting it all. So by hiding in plain sight, MPC 79 just disappeared from view as an innovation. Isn't that interesting? It's like, it just happened. Now in the modern world, we've seen a lot of this. I think, in a way, a lot of these processes have slipped into internetlandia, and people are kind of accidentally reverse engineering and reapplying and projecting forward things of this kind which are simply latent in this infrastructure that was positioned right in front of us at Park. So what might these participants in MPC Summit, what did they think it might have been about? Well, since we used the ARPANET, many thought DARPA had launched this. Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, I think most people here are familiar with it. I also did a tour there. That was tremendously exciting at the height of the Cold War, but that's a whole other story. You think Washington is crazy now. You should have seen it back then. Oh my God. Anyway, when DARPA sponsored the technology transfer of the work that I was doing at Park to a support contractor, many future users of what came to be known as the Moses service thought that it had been invented by DARPA. Okay? What was beautiful about this, if anyone knew this was somehow my idea, people thought that no one would ever have used any of it, you see? It got sort of thought of as invented by other people, which is cool. Here's why. DARPA had such a mystique by then, again, entering the height of the Cold War. Government-supported Moses-like services began springing up in other countries. So why do you think so many universities started using the textbook? See? Okay. So what it did was, this swept through the high-tech community with anybody having any idea it had been deliberately generated, much less how that was done or who did it. And what was kind of amazing, although this book was iconically connected with these large-scale events, and so Mead began getting all these awards, he was never able to explain what happened. He never actually explained what happened. Why? Because he didn't know what happened. I'll tell you why. Because remember those design rules? When I came up with those rules, I shared them with Mead at Park. And we decided to go ahead and put them in the very first chapters of the book that was going to evolve. And 3 months later, I went down to Caltech. And grad students came running up to me, showing me the design rules Mead had invented. And of course, by then, Gordon Moore will have known too. So, okay, what do you do when something like that happens? I thought for a moment, I'm not going to tell him what I'm coming up with. So all the rest of the time, through the book, through this course at MIT, through MPC, he had no clue what I was doing. I didn't tell him what I was doing. He had no idea of this meta-level frame that was developing based on my background in mathematics, anthropology, sociology, and so forth. You see? The fusion of innovations. So how could he explain that? Didn't know about it. Okay. So the effect here is almost all people are blind to innovations, especially those made by folks who they don't expect to make them. And these innovations diffuse by social processes involving subliminal group noticings, mimickings, rejections, adoptions, adaptations, tradings, and displacements. Meanwhile, credits for innovations as social markers are separately, subliminally assigned gain, granted, barter, seized, etc. And these processes are modulated by visibility, status, prestige, class power, location, credentials, prejudice, popularity, influence, money, and of course, accident. Now, the high visibility of crediting versus the invisibility of innovation sustains both the crediting processes and the ongoing blindness to innovations. And I use that little distracted by greed thing of the big fish eating the littler fish. This is kind of the game that gets going among the crediting of interest people. And I want you to think about this because participation in innovation is a great adventure. And in the end, you don't do it for credit. You do it for the love of the game, the love of the adventure, the love of being on teams that do this stuff, that play these games. And it's another whole universe of people who are so distracted by a need for power or fame who play this second game. So there's a lot of questions, deep questions raised there. But here's really the one I want to leave you with that's kind of interesting. there's a corollary to this. It's possible to trigger large paradigm shifts right out in the open, as long as people have no clue what you're doing. And I wonder, could this even have happened any other way? I don't think so. So, there is a moral to this story. Thinking back on PTS and all that kind of thing back in 2009 and 10, one lesson I've learned is when weirdness breaks out, don't get upset. Do science on it. Seriously, it's so much fun. Thank you. So what's next? Do we do a panel, or how do we?
People have a couple of questions.
Okay.
For Lynn before we go into the panel.
Hello?
Yeah, there we go.
Sorry. Thank you for the talk. What you've described from a few decades ago still sounds completely familiar to me,
Sure.
both through my graduate work here years ago and also just through my work with academics now, which is, I work with faculty in a lot of different fields. And what I find, it's sort of a cycle, I think, for women or other people that are in the non-dominant presenting culture in academia, which I think can best be described as really a white supremacist culture that we're really not aware of, I think, in a lot of ways, and then we become aware of it. And, you know, as I was hearing you talk about this, it was giving me flashbacks to graduate school where, people only hear ideas from the people they want to hear it from, or, you know, the people that are visible in their sphere of power and influence. And it's sort of a perfect cycle of repression, because when people that are with less power start to point out, like you said, what do you do when the students come up to you and say, here's the rules that this guy created? Do you say, oh, no, that was me? Because when people try to point those out, they're actually then told you're being too sensitive, you're being too XYZ, and it may not be malicious, it may also just be that you're invisible. And so my question is, for people that have these experiences in academia, I kind of alternate between, yes, letting it go and just doing what the innovation is and supporting the work and trying to forget the ego, but also the social justice aspect of refusing to be invisible and refusing to let the people, the faculty, the men, et cetera, take the credit. But, you know, if they don't actually see you and they say, no, I don't see you and what you're saying makes no sense, I don't know, where do you balance being invisible and not being invisible? If that makes any sense.
That's a really important question, because it's one that immediately comes to people's minds when they first realize this is happening to them. Presents a lot of personal dilemmas. What I would say is, think ahead into the future that's coming very, very rapidly, and is largely here already for much of the work that's been going on in science and engineering for, let's say, the past 10 years. What it is now, all the work the teams do is being captured in real time. The tracks are being left everywhere. So it's going to be possible to back-chain, reverse engineer innovations to where the onset is. It most seriously is going to be possible. Okay, just think about that for a minute. So increasingly, your students will be able to go on the adventures. They'll be able to be a learner on this project, take different roles in other projects, become a leader of this team, doing that event, that thing. It's in the record. And because it's more quickly linked to by other people, all sorts of other things are happening. And in a world where there's increasingly open access publication, all of this will be chainable. So they don't have to worry about getting the credit as much, because if it turns out what they did was important, it will be possible for them to be found as having been part of the origination of that. Puts less pressure on people to have to enter these other games so they can put more of their focus on the adventuring and on finding hard teams to join, on figuring out what kind of teams can they play really cool roles on. Sometimes leader in this area, sometimes a beginner in something you know is going to take off. You're doing all that in parallel, you're leaving tracks everywhere. By the way, building a social reputation as someone who's good to have on your team. Not only are they a great leader over here, but look, they went off and learned this stuff. They're now an intermediate already. Okay. Besides that, there will be an increasing and unfolding period where the past episodes like this one will become increasingly revealed because it's easy to reveal them. So more and more people can have some fun doing opposition research or whatever you want to call it on whoever to find out not just about politicians, but, quote, prestigious and famous faculty members or scientists, not just what sexual weirdnesses they got into. I mean, that's like whatever, but look at all this crazy stuff they were given credit for, and they accepted it. And as that process happens, the thing that will be dangerous for someone to do who wants to end up actually being prestigious, okay, will be to have accepted credit for things you didn't do. So there you get that counter pressure. And these are the kind of structural, social, and it's technosocial dynamics because it involves people and artifacts and the pinging back and forth around and the awarenesses that people get that there are certain dangerous things you can do in these worlds today that you got away with automatically years ago and you didn't even realize you were doing it. That's giving credit for people, let's say, just not understanding why they were given credit. The reason they will accept credit is usually very simple. They'll accept credit because they and the people giving the awards, none of them understand what the innovation was. Only the innovator understood, and they've never had a voice to talk about it. So very interesting. So if you there's a physics to it. You can get to where you can kind of wander that world, and use different mathematical framings of it. Network-based diffusion analysis is part of it, but some of it is just wandering around on strange manifolds, and there are holes here, and there's weirdness there, and how do you go with that? And I think the experience is accumulated. So I'm very hopeful. See, I think all these lessons are actually embedded in this story. Because see, I haven't kept all this stuff all the way back. I have all the emails I ever sent back to Ones in Park in 1975. So anyway, I hope that's helpful because there's an alternative to just forcing it or not. It's leave tracks. If there's anything to do, it's go on lots of adventures, and every one you do, leave tracks about it. Write little essays to yourself and your friends, and if nothing else, there's the modern equivalent of the lab notebook is building hugely, it's exponentiating.
So you, I think, answered my question. Great talk. I was fascinated. But I'm thinking about Mead, the person, and all of the credit he accepted. And I think that you're very kind to let him off easy by sort of diffusing a little bit. Like, okay, he didn't understand the innovation, but he's still an accomplished scientist, so he understood that he wasn't at least solely responsible for it, right? And so I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that perspective, that end of things, people knowingly taking full credit for something that they didn't fully do alone. Even if he didn't understand the innovation, he understood that it wasn't just him, right? And that's Katherine Johnson, that is Rosalind Franklin, and all of the people in the past who have watched other people accept awards for it, not even things that they did themselves, but not even sharing in the fact that they worked on this with someone else. And this, just sort of to point out one more thing that Sarah mentioned to me, is that we're in an elite bubble in this room, right? And so if the innovation occurs by some of us who appear to be invisible, perhaps we are leaving tracks, but what about those people outside of this bubble who are innovators? And so they don't even register on the radar.
I know.
So just thoughts about that.
Yeah, I've been reluctant to attribute any kind of motives to my colleague or colleagues of others that have experienced similar effects because it isn't really necessary to. But I will observe something interesting, the way of thinking about this issue you've raised. Which would you rather, if you were a kind of a celebrity scientist, which would you rather be the update in your Wikipedia page? You know, namely that you were granted credit for things that you didn't do, and you deliberately accepted it without bringing in the other person, and of course you must have known there was something there. Or which would be kind of a, you know, this person's a little bit sleazy, well, everybody is, you know, we all have our faults. Or would you rather it be that this person was simply totally clueless? They just wandered into this stuff happened, they made some contributions, they didn't really know what was going on, and they were given all these awards, and once you're given awards and you're prestigious, you can get in front of audiences like this, and anything you say will be appreciated. See, that's one of the problems with being celebrity-like. You know, I'm not really effective when people already know kind of who I am. You see what I mean? I got a much more interesting, I had a remarkable intellectual conversation with the Lyft driver on the way from the airport. One of the best conversations I had with anyone in the last 6 months. About a bunch of stuff. I could replay that, but you see what I mean? It's like somebody doesn't, you know, you get something going, and you know, it's like you're in a band, you know, and you get it going. I think there are dangers here for people who have lived in these past cultures and gotten used to spiraling around in them, and the world has kind of passed by and has illuminated many things that they have been doing they aren't aware of. And it's dangerous territory. I think we can see a lot of that in modern politics. And some of it is, you know, has a tragic air to it, like Biden's situation. And I'm sure he'll overcome that. I think he's really, really aware now what's going on. And there are many things like it. We've all done things where we, you know, we're not aware how we're hurting people. I myself, I've engaged in a lot of activities that many of my liberal friends are horrified by. I just don't tell them about it. Don't talk about it. I'm a hunter, okay? My husband grew up on a farm, fishing, hunting, woodcraft, knowing how to grow things. I know how to hunt animals, take them apart, and eat them. See? Now, you know, that sounds horrifying, right? Why does that sound horrifying? What kind of world are people living in now where they would find that unusual when 200 years ago, that's what you did if you want to stay alive? You see? And people don't know about things. Well, first of all, you're highly impoverished because we all get tossed in the North Woods. Who among us is going to live very long? Think about it. Fieldcraft. Okay? So we want to be careful about getting angry about things, about being so tribal that things can't be talked about. If you were to talk about it, you might learn some stuff. You see? You might really learn some stuff. Now, I know there's a few people here who have gone off the deep end about hunting. Sorry about that. You know, I feel bad for you because you know, there's an aspect of the reality you might be unaware of. And think of your children, think of your family. If you were out somewhere and didn't know how to feed them, what's going to happen? Okay? You're squeamish about taking an animal apart, knowing how to preserve the meat, what's going to happen? So again, I throw that in just as a kind of shock thing to just raise awareness among us. There are all these whirls and ebbs and flows oscillating around. And oh, by the way, I have extreme empathy with the vegetarian movement, and there's a lot of recent science that's probably going to make that work on how to add flavor to sort of fake meats to where it really does taste like meat. And that's probably going to be a really great way to go, see, to reduce the suffering of factory farming. So again, all of these things, you think about the tribal natures, and all of that. And in this case, though, the world is changing fast. And as Eric Hopper said, in a world of change, the learner shall inherit the earth, while the learned shall be perfectly prepared for a world that no longer exists. Gotta be a learner. Ask questions. Find good leaders to follow. Lead some teams. Go on adventures. Anyway, that's really it. I'm
Okay.
kind of worn out.
All right, thanks, Lynn. If I could get our panelists to come up so we can continue the discussion. We're already getting texted questions from the viewers online. So panelists, please come up. Have some water for you, Lynn.
Oh. Well, now I got that out.
You want me to be still at getting people on the microphone if they have questions? Okay. So we'll give preference to people in the audience for asking questions, and if there's a lull, then I'll pick questions that are being submitted online. But I want to introduce our panelists. In addition to Lynn Conway, we have Veronica Contreras, who is an undergraduate student, Mara Zarafula, who is a graduate student, and Lisette Bazil-Cruz, who is a postdoctoral fellow. And I'd like you all to maybe start out by introducing yourselves and how you feel about some of the issues that we've been raising. And then we'll go into launching the questions, so take maybe a minute or two. So Mara, we'll start with you.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry about that. Good morning, everyone. First, I would really like to thank to invite me today, and it's my honor to be literally sitting beside Lynn. My name is Marwa Zafrullah. I'm basically a graduate student, and I belong to Pakistan. One of the big thing, like when I get an email about that this is like kind of a panel and everyone is going to be like come up, I thought it could be one of the very good opportunity for me to not being here to listen the story from this side, but also being like share my experience, not only being in US, but also belong to another culture and another country. That's the scenario is kind of very different as you're observing over here. Over here, as Lynn was explaining, I'm feeling that the situation that she was talking, that happening in 1970, I think this is what we're observing in 2019 over there. Like in the faculty of like 25 or 30 people, you can only see 2 females, and that's not what I'm exaggerating. That's something the truth about that. So I think it could be like a kind of player to be here, and like see what the perspective is coming, and then take this information and knowledge to be out there and make the situation better and bring it to the situation where we can, have more representation of women in science. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. And I'm also very honored to be on this panel and to be able to share some of the work that we have been doing through the UC Davis Advanced Social Science Research Initiative that speaks to the issues that were presented to you today. And one of the big things that I want to just shed light to is that within academia, with the women that we interviewed, these were Latina faculty members and STEM and non-STEM fields and part of our sample. that there was this hyper visibility of the women as minorities and looked at in terms of diversity panels, mentoring all the students of color, undergraduate and graduate. But the big takeaway was that they were invisible as scientists. And that in that process, they would not take ownership of some of the discoveries that they have been doing because they had not received tenure. And that in those aspects, there was a lot of dynamics at play that contributed to the invisibility and to the not speaking up and taking ownership of their contributions into science, which was what's the end goal is becoming tenured. But then once tenured happens is that they've already been casted into this invisible role as scientists, and it's very hard to break away from that.
Hi, I'm Veronica Contreras, and I'm an undergraduate in the Electrical and Computer Engineering department. And I also wanted to say thank you to the Advanced Office for inviting me to come today. But as for the ideas that were presented, I mean, as an undergraduate, I haven't made any, like, breaking discoveries, but I plan to. So hearing this is actually really terrifying. And so I hope that we can work to change it. So my discoveries will be very well known that it was me. So that's a goal that I'd like to achieve.
Okay, we'd like to open it up to the audience to see if anyone has a question for the panel. Oh, there's a hand.
I was just wondering if you had any practical advice for avoiding bias in our recognition going forward in our careers, right? So we all like to think that we kind of treat everybody equally, but there's always sort of an implicit bias that you've picked up. And even if you're a little bit aware of it, right, doesn't mean you're going to be able to avoid it. And I was just wondering if you accumulated any advice along the way.
Yes, bias starts to creep in as young, when our children are very young. And with the roles that we cast as society to our males versus our females are very different. The toys that are available to children are very different. I find it amazing that in 2019, Lego finally had a female scientist as part of their Lego sets, where the remainder, all of the scientists, the engineers, the people that are building are male. And some of the research that's already out there in terms of getting girls involved and minorities in STEM have shown that it's in kindergarten, it's in first grade, where children are starting to either visualize themselves as potential scientists, as creators, and what those roles are. So as they progress in education, their desires to become a scientist decrease. And so once they get to middle school, high school, college, that's why we have such small numbers. So when we're looking at the future, we have to start from the beginning. And I really believe that it's how we are teaching science, how we're educating kids, and how society are casting roles to children.
Hi, I have a question. I think that maybe, I guess what I want to pose is, what happens if we actually question credit in the first place? Because one of the things that I see in not just stories here, but even in other stories of innovation in other fields, is like this is not, the story of who gets credit is often, turns into one of pain, one of struggle, one, of ways that forms of systemic oppression come out. And so I wonder, are there things that we can see, whether it's happening in science or are there different models, say, of more collectivity that might actually, you could say, produce better knowledge, produce innovation, produce whether it's workplaces or environments where people actually feel like they can bring more of their full selves? Is in a sense this individualistic model part of the problem, and how could we find different models?
Let me try a little bit on that. One thing I'm noticing, especially among the user experience designers, the design community is rapidly taking on many of the sort of key product architectural roles that managers and engineers have played in the past. And what I'm sensing is an exuberant emergence of lots of, not just things, but of things in the experiences users have, an exploration for making things cooler and better, more interesting, more wonderful, where it's a team experience in doing that, and individual accomplishments that are really stunning are very much noticed, and people become aware of them, and people gain prestige. But where the communities thrive on the adventure of being in the community, of being at a wavefront where things are happening. And once that happens, this idea that everything is stationary and you are now a celebrity starts disappearing. It's as though most people nowadays play finite games and they expect to win big on something and then just live there forever. But there's only one game worth playing, is the infinite game, just to stay in the game, to be a player, and to be there all your life, having fun, going on adventures. And if more people thought about it that way, they would be less apt to sort of stop and look at and idolize static, iconic celebrities. You know, that celebrity wishing is almost, celebrity iconization has almost become a religious right now. You know, people are in thrall of something. And it would be a lot cooler to be constantly just trying to do your darndest to stay in the game and be surfing some new wave. And having fun doing it with people who are trying to figure out, what can we do with this one? So in a way, maybe one thing that's evolving here is a shifting away from a social emphasis of celebrity as being rather meaningless. And the only problem is that in our current system, the jumping for fame and claim connects with making money. And we all struggle with, okay, we have to put food on the table, we've got to secure our futures and that sort of thing. So we're all tempted from time to time to do things we might not otherwise do. One temptation being simply to work very, very hard over and over again at something we really hate doing because we got to keep putting food on the table. We don't see a way out of that trap. But it's changing. Things are changing fast. So be part of the adventure of making the change exciting and go in interesting directions. And I think the user experience design community is sort of one of the things, and it'll be interesting to see whether they get their celebrities too, or whether they're just going to really continue spreading the fun through really this wonderful stuff that's emerging.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to jump in here and combine a question that we got online with something that Lynn had said that I thought was deeply profound when we were having Zoom, I think it was, a phone conversation, and we brought up the issue of who controls the reward system and where do you change it. And as you all know, STEM academia is very hierarchical. Start out undergrad, grad student, postdoc, assistant professor, associate, full, and maybe into the National Academy of Sciences if that's the top tier. And when we were talking about this, what Lynn said that I thought was so profound was, she said, you have to remember when you're climbing those hierarchical structures, it's a ladder to the past. The higher you go, the more committed people are to the way things were because they were successful in the way those things were. So the question that we got online had to deal with how would you, at your tier, and we have people at different tiers, recommend change at that tier that would help you feel supported and stay in the game, as Lynn was talking about. So I'll toss that out to the panel and maybe start with Lynn, since it was her, I think, brilliant observation of the hierarchy as a ladder to the past.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That was a fun interaction and conversation, and it partly one of the thoughts there is, academia is in trouble, and I think we all know it. But it can reinvent itself, probably will, because it's full of smart people, and some of them are going to figure out new ways to do things, and they're going to just not talk about it. They're just going to start doing it, say whatever it is, and that'll start change. Whatever that is, that gets going. Other people will say, that looks cooler than what I'm doing, I'm going to join that. See? And people vote with their feet. But having mental models is useful. Here's one. Back in the day when Stanford was really taking off, there was a notion in the Valley, spires of excellence. You build great universities and you attract, you only even have the departments where you get top people, and you're going to have the most excellent. So I want you to think of these spires of excellence. And it works the same way with wealth. I'll come to that side. But I've watched the people who are occupying the spires of excellence, and I do a little math on it. I just invert it. What I'm seeing that instead of being static, has a certain kind of social dynamics. I'm seeing in the undulating ocean, I'm seeing occasionally these deep whirlpools that spiral down. And the people down in them are struggling to get down to the very bottom. See? They're trying to be the one who is gone the furthest. And what happens is the further you get down in there, the more you're cycling around doing the same thing every day with the same people, trying to butt heads with them to see if you can get by them to get to the bottom. This is the spiral of excellence I'm talking about. And what you find about that, it's like a black hole. Once you get a certain distance back in there, unless you've left some kind of magic rope, you can't get back out. Because while you've been doing that, the ocean seas have been shifting and changing. And in fact, no one even knows you're there, you see? So that's what's weird about the elite groups and celebrity and so forth. It's kind of like, if you have a lot of money, you live in New York City, what do? You're going to buy the apartment or the condo or the floor or the penthouse on the tallest building you can. The higher you are up, the more status you have. When your friends come by and you get together and all get drunk together or whatever you do. And so that's a little bit like these whirlpools. You invert it. And you got these people, they live in these towers, but it's really, they are isolated from the real world of the streets where stuff is really happening. And what's so cool is, see, it's a little difficult to actually get out. They got to go down a lot of elevators. They got to worry about the security and all this kind of thing. So they mostly stay up there. I mean, why would you want to go out with all the riffraff? So food's delivered, things happen. You live up there, and the only time you go out is when you go zipping down and you get chauffeured in a black car to somebody else's tower that you immediately go up in. And that's your life. Believe it or not, obviously, many extremely rich people live exactly that way. And just like the people in the Spire of Excellence that are all arguing among themselves, they have no idea what's happening down on the street. They have no idea what's happening in the world. You see, because they only care about the few they aren't richer than or more prestigious than. Once you get that model, you kind of know what to do. You certainly know what not to do. Do these people even really matter? Why do people take them so seriously? Find a team, go do something exciting. Find people you know, tune into something, go off on an adventure. So I don't know if that's helpful, but that's a mental model. You can build mental models of all kinds of things. I love those, though. They're very helpful. They help remind you not to get trapped in those. That's the whole idea. The stories are trapped by seeking prestige, fame and power and money are traps that can simply bring you into something that's closing tighter and tighter around you that you're spending all your time doing instead of getting a life. Feel sorry for them. I'm serious.
Okay, anyone else want to tackle that question?
As an undergraduate student, I can definitely say that no one really knows what major they're choosing. You know, that you pick it, but you don't really know like what you're about to learn. And I feel like what would motivate students to stay in the game at this level would probably be more people with couches in their office, or, you know, people being there as mentors and reaching out, you know, actively pursuing these students who aren't really sure what's about to come and how to navigate the challenges that they're going to go through, such as like exponentially increasing difficulty in their coursework and just piling on loads of work and stuff that, you know, who knows, what if they don't like it, or they're struggling with different professors and how they're, you know, speaking with them as students. You know, sometimes professors can be very focused on their research and not so much on their teaching. And I think if they could just reach out more as like, hey, how's your day going? That would go miles. And I think that can also help with retention for, you know, these sort of communities.
I would just like to add a little bit on the ongoing conversation that we are doing, and it's going very beautifully. I feel personally by myself is like, I know that a lot of people are saying that sometimes it's hard to speak up, and I think in the science sometimes it's like really, really hard, especially if you're like falling low in a hierarchy that we are talking right now. But I feel that as being advocate for your own self, sometimes very important that you really speak up. There's a different ways. You really not need to be like a rude or going out of the way, but you have to tell that you are here and what you are doing. Especially if you are working with with a team, it's sometimes hard when you're working a collaborative work and then something comes up. You know that it's a teamwork and it's coming up, but sometimes you're not even getting a credit for the things that you really put it in. And I think that's a time when you have to talk, when you have to come up, and that helps you when you're going up. As Lynn said, then when you're reaching a point when you actually have a power, then you know that how you can help the one who are below you and how you can help them in speaking up and in advocating for themselves, because this is how you make your own way. So I think I would like to.
I just want to close by saying that, well, this particular portion is on the power of mentoring. And mentoring is so important, and we have to deviate from models that are about solo mentoring, that one individual has one mentor, but move towards models and advocate models that somebody that's going to help you holistically. There might be a mentor that can help you academically, another mentor that can help you in your research interest, somebody that's going to help you stay in the game and stay where you're at. And I think it's particularly difficult for students of color and women because we are not taught to ask for what we need, and instead to navigate and to swim and to find the resources that we need by ourselves, because this is how the institution is made, for you to be an individual to go through it. And in those mentoring models, I see myself as striving to mentor the students that I get to interact with the hope that those students will go and mentor someone else and create these branches where I'm not just reaching one student, but I'm reaching more, so to speak, and that we are able to diversify in real meaningful ways these institutions. Mentoring has to be personal. I don't believe that some of our mentoring programs that have been historically in place have been successful because the individuality of the student is not explored, is not recognized, and is not honored. And we just see students as another biology student, another engineering student, but we don't credit them as a daughter, a sister, a community member who is here not just representing themselves, but representing a larger space of people. They're representing their families, they're representing their communities, and when we don't recognize and honor that, I think we fail. And we fail to show those individual students the potential that they have, because we're not personable. We're not personable to our students. They're scared of coming to office hours. They don't have couches in office hours. And I find that to be really problematic, and it's the norm, right? That I always hear, I don't go to office hours because I'm scared. What am I going to talk to my professor about? And so us as instructors, we need to break down our identities to say, like, I see you. You see me and I see you. And these are our commonalities that we can build a relationship upon.
I think that's an excellent point, Liseth, because, you and I have discussed that there is a real issue with just how we're structured. And so if the major professor is taking credit for your work, they're the person who's going to write the letters of evaluation for you, so you're kind of in this bind of you can't go and say, hey, I'd like to get more credit, because the trade-off is you get more credit, but maybe not so enthusiastic of a letter. So I think when you have other mentors or other advisors, people who can help you navigate through that and maybe be the person that's like, hey, I noticed your student did this great thing, and try and bring back some of the credit, where the credit belongs. So I think that there are things that need to be done, but there's this recognition that it's challenging to expect someone to challenge the next tier up when that tier holds power over you. That we need to come up with other ways to encourage people, to stay in the system, or to just recognize it among ourselves that there's an issue. So one of the students at the conference that I was talking about, who told me these horrible stories of being treated invisibly, many of these were happening at a group meeting. And her major professor was like right there. And I knew him really well, so I just started encouraging her and encouraging the discussion between the two of them. And he was shocked because he had no idea that she thought he was treating her like she was invisible. And so a lot of it is getting the dialogue going too, to say, hey, this is how your behavior is being perceived by this individual, but also recognizing that it's hard for that individual to make that case and not be seen as a complainer or too sensitive. But it's sometimes easier for outside people to do it.
That reminds me of one more thing. I think that in particular with STEM fields, we need to equip our students to have the knowledge and the way to name what they're experiencing and say, that's a microaggression. This is where I'm fighting for a sense of belonging. This is where I feel like an outsider. And equip them to say, like, this is what's going to happen in academia, unfortunately. But now you know that you're not the only one that's going through that, and you should seek help. And you have the opportunity to change that in the future. If you go into academia, you treat your students differently. Mm-hmm. That you're the one that's like a small catalyst for change. But equipping students with that knowledge of what they're going to experience, I think is really powerful, because then they come in knowing that at some point, particularly, and this is horrible, but these are the narratives that we hear, especially for our Latinas that are in STEM fields, that people confuse them as the janitors. And that happens across the gamut, and it comes up in a lot of our interviews, is that they're mistaken for workers of the university instead of contributors, right, of science. And so understanding that is not a reflection of who they are as people, but rather as this bigger problem, to help them stay in.
All right, thank you. So I think our time is up, and I think I'll end with paraphrasing Lynn's motto of be the change you want to see, because I think if we do that at each of the tiers, then the change will drift upward, up the tier as people move up the tier. So I want to thank the panelists for their insight and their participation, and all of you for participating as well as the audience.